There's a story that's found in the Old Testament in the book called Daniel. And in this book of Daniel, we find several stories that we usually rehearse and recite to one another as various applications for the Christian life. But this one in particular holds special meaning. And many people are aware of this, but I'd like to use it this morning as a way to help each one of us understand the influence that we may have in other people's lives and how we should behave as believers and followers in Jesus Christ. Now, this story, it's found in the book of Daniel, chapter number 3. And it features 3 young men. You maybe have heard of them. Their names are Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And as we find these 3 men, these are rulers in the Babylonian kingdom. And as rulers in the Babylonian kingdom, there were certain expectations that they had. And one of those was to do what the king says. They found themselves in a problem because the king was asking them to do something that was completely contrary to what God had commanded them to do. And so they had a choice. They had a problem. Just like you and I face every single day when we're tempted to do what's wrong. So let's read part of the story this morning, and then we're going to begin to walk our way through it and discover some important lessons in our lives today. Beginning in Daniel chapter number 3 and in verse number 1, we read this. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces gathered for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O nations, peoples, languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, in this story, we find this king has erected this large statue, this idol, this image. It's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. This is a massive structure, and he has instructed all of the people from all of the provinces to gather together, and as soon as they heard the music, they were to worship it. Now, obviously, this is a problem for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because you see, they had a command from God. How many of you know the Ten Commandments? Have you heard of the Ten Commandments? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Ten Commandments. What is the first commandment? You will have no other God before me. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they knew the command of God. You will have no other God. And yet here the king is telling them, you will worship this image. Now we have a conflict. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are gathered with all of the people. And no one notices them while they're standing there with everyone else. And that's just like it is in your life. As long as everything is going along and everything is fine and you're not being tempted to do what is wrong, for the most part, people are going to ignore you. But the moment that you have to make a decision to not follow temptation, to not do what is wrong, suddenly people are going to begin to notice you. That's what happened in our story. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, no one paid them any attention until everyone else fell down. And suddenly, they're the only three standing. And now everyone is paying attention to these three men. Now, they weren't trying to keep everyone else from falling down and worshiping. They weren't trying to create any set of circumstances that would stop anyone else from doing whatever they wanted. But as soon as these three men obeyed God, then people noticed them, and it was uncomfortable for them. Because you see, to fall down and worship this image was going to mean that there would now be a problem between them and God Almighty. They would disobey His command. And so they had made a choice long before that they were only going to serve God. And so when this moment came, they recognized that they could not bow. They could not fall and worship this image. That brings us to this confrontation with the king. Because you see, the king is their friend. He is the one who has made them leaders in all of Babylon. And so he's going to give them a second chance. Look at verse number 15 of Daniel chapter 3. Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Notice this question that he asks them. Who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? And so now there's a real problem in their life. It was a problem whenever they were out on the plain and refused to bow. That brought them before the king. And now they're standing face to face, eye to eye with the king. And the king is telling them, you must do this. And if you don't do this, the consequences, the results of your actions are going to be dire. You're going to be thrown into a fiery furnace. Look at their response in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. But now notice this part of their answer. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But now we come to the part of the story that causes some conflict in our life. Notice what they say. But if not. They're saying, even if our God does not deliver us, we will not bow, O king. They said, we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Now notice, this is important for each one of us today. They didn't say, I need to pray about this. They didn't say, I need to go to my small group and I need to ask their opinion. I need to get with my friends at church and I need to ask their opinion and see if there's a way around this. I need to read my Bible and see if maybe there's another way that I can interpret God's command. They knew what was right. And now they're confronted with the choice. You see, it's easy for us whenever we're here in a group like this, surrounded by people who have placed their faith and trust in Jesus Christ. It's easy for us to make choices here. It's easy whenever you're in your small group to make a choice to do what is right. It's difficult when you're not surrounded by Christians and you're not surrounded by people who trust Jesus Christ. It's difficult on Monday morning or on Tuesday morning to then act on the choices that you have made. It's hard to do that. And that's what we find here with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They had made a choice, a decision. We will not bow. And now they have to act on that decision. They have to act on the choice that they have made. You see, we look at this and we read all of these times in the Old Testament. Whenever people were facing dire circumstances and they heard the voice of God. God didn't say anything here. Remember whenever Moses was wandering in the wilderness and God spoke to him out of the burning bush and said, Moses, take off your shoes. The ground you're walking on is holy. Or whenever he spoke to Noah and told Noah that you're going to go build an ark. Or how about whenever God sent an angel to tell Mary, Mary, you have found favor with God, and you're going to bear a son, and you're going to call his name Jesus, for he will save his people from their sins. Wouldn't it be awesome if whenever we are going through problems and trials in our life, and we come to a point where we have to act on a choice, if God would speak from heaven and say, don't do it. Wouldn't that be easy? But God doesn't do that. And God didn't do it here. As we read in this story, God was silent Because you see, God had already told them, here's what you're going to do. He didn't need to tell them anything else. All they had to do was act on what God had said. That brings us to an important point. Faith is trusting God, regardless of the circumstances. Faith is trusting God. It's easy to trust God whenever you're standing on the plane and everyone else is standing with you. Nobody notices you. There's no pressure. It's difficult to trust God when everyone else around you is disobeying and following the sinful culture and you alone are standing. That's whenever your faith is put to the test. You have to trust God. Well, that brings us to the king's response and the result of their obedience to God and disobedience to King Nebuchadnezzar. Verse number 19. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with fury, and the expression of his face was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times more than it was usually heated. And he ordered some of the mighty men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Then these men were bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, their other garments, and they were thrown into the burning fiery furnace. Because the king's order was urgent, and the furnace overheated, the flame of the fire killed those men who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell, bound, into the burning fiery furnace. You know, whenever we are walking in the Christian life, and we meet here and gather together as a church and we're singing the worship songs, we're singing praise to God, our hearts are filled, and we make choices that I am going to follow God. We expect that whenever we have a moment of crisis, that God is going to rescue us. What happens when He doesn't? Does that mean that He is any less God? Because you see here, wouldn't it have been a wonderful part of the story if just as these 3 men walked up the stairs, getting ready to be thrown into the fiery furnace, if suddenly God sent an angel and rescued them, or God sent some troops on white horses to come in and to free them? But that's not what happened. They were thrown into the furnace. That's another important point that we need to recognize and take from our time together this morning. And that is this: God did not deliver them from the furnace. He delivered them in the middle of that fiery furnace. God sometimes is not going to rescue you from the results of your obedience to Him. There are consequences that we each face whenever we choose to obey God and go against what everyone else is saying. And God is not always going to rescue us from the results of our righteous decisions, but He will always be with us in those decisions. He will always be with us in the results of those decisions. And that's what we find here. Look at verse number 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up in haste he declared to his counselors, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire. They are not hurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like the Son of God." We are entering into a time that our culture is unlike any other time in history. Never before in the history of the world has the entire world and every culture been changing as rapidly as it is today. And there are forces at work that are going to be coming against you, and they're going to be challenging you to make choices against the choices you have made to serve God and the Lord Jesus Christ. They're going to want you to turn your back on those things and to go along with what they're saying. And there may be consequences that you're going to have to face if you choose to obey God and not men. But I want you to notice something that's so important as we get ready to wrap our time up together and close this morning. Notice the influence that these 3 men had. You see, the king thought that this was going to be the end of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He thought that this was the end of them and that he had proven his point and that no one could stand up to King Nebuchadnezzar. Remember one of the questions that he had asked them? Who can deliver you out of my hand? Well, as it turns out, there is one who is greater than any king. And he delivered them out of Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Nebuchadnezzar, as these men went into the furnace, he did not recognize God. But because of these men's obedience to God, they influenced the king of Babylon as he looks into the fiery furnace and says, "The 4th is like the Son of God." You don't know who might be watching your life. You don't know who you might influence by simply obeying God. Choices that are made here are difficult to act upon out there. But that doesn't mean that they are unimportant. You make choices here that I will follow God. And whenever you get into your day-to-day life, you must act on that decision and choice. And people are watching you. And your obedience, your faithfulness, your trust in God is going to influence all of those around you. Yes, sometimes God is silent. He was silent here. He didn't speak into their lives, and maybe they were wondering, "God, where are you?" It was not that he was unaware of their circumstances. It was not that he didn't care. He had already told them what to do. "You will have no other gods before me." They didn't need any further explanation. All they had to do was obey what God had already said. And because of their influence, even the king recognized the one and true God. There's a song that we sing in the United States sometimes, It says, my Lord knows the way through the wilderness. All I have to do is follow. I don't have to know the way through the wilderness. He knows. All I have to do is follow Him. And that's the same way it is in our life. I don't have to know how the results of my decisions to follow God are going to turn out. I don't have to know that everything's going to be okay. I don't have to know what's going to happen tomorrow. Because you see, I know the one who holds tomorrow. All I have to do is follow Him. And so as we leave this morning, I'm going to encourage you. You make choices here. You have to act on them out there. Keep your eyes on Him. You don't know who is watching, who you are going to influence. You don't have to know how your choices are going to turn out. All you have to know is Him, and He will lead you.